everyone. I hope this finds you as well as it might, and that you and your loved ones and teams are safe. My name is Greg, and welcome to our second Bath Life Business Surgery. We're trying to help businesses and employees in these tough times with practical advice and valuable insights. We can all do with help. These Bath Life Business Surgeries should help guide you on vital decisions in the coming months. Decisions which will affect your business, your employees, and our city's economy. It's not at all easy for any of us, with our business plans, for this year at least, long since decimated. And for many companies, the definition of success has been reduced to one word: survival. Good luck and good wisdom from wherever you can get it. But before we get going, some news. Following the sellout success of the first one, we're launching another Bath Life virtual wine tasting event with our partner Stony Street. This time it'll raise money for the mighty Bath Bulls, and we're running that on the evening of June 3. Look out for comms on that, both email and social, and we hope to see some of you there. It's great to get people together, which of course is one of the other reasons for doing these events as well. And one other point, if you have time-sensitive news, such as some businesses opening up, just as they are this morning, please do talk to us about using the Bath Life weekly newsletter, which is out today and every Friday. So today, we'll be hearing in this employment and HR special from Mogers Drewett. We'll cover everything and anything from the furlough scheme and its changes, holiday entitlements, return to work, employers' duty of care, employees' rights, all in the context of lockdown and the immediate post-lockdown period. And this will be advice for business owners, employees, senior managers, those with HR responsibility, pretty much all of us in any form of business or organisations. And just to say on the latter, we have arts companies and charities here today amidst a whole variety of businesses, something like 80 attendees in all. I'll be interviewing two speakers from Mogers Drewett on your behalf, and we'll bring in questions during it. Please ask your own using the little Q&A tab at the bottom. And they can be anonymous if they're very sensitive. For example, I know several people have been asking about redundancy process in furlough and post-furlough times. If you wish to ask them in person, then say video at the start of the message and we'll try and bring you in. Our two speakers today, Sean McDonough, Partner and Head of Employment and HR at Mogers Drewett, and one of the senior management team at the company, and Lucy Cottrell, Employment and HR Specialist. So let's start with Mogers Drewett as a company first with Sean. So Sean, if we could bring you in, please. Hello, Sean.
Hi, Greg.
Hello, Sean. Yeah, you did that magnificent thing of just giving a little frisson of delay that made me think, oh, God, I've got a basket.
I was wrestling with Stephanie for control of my camera. So, but
yeah, good luck with that one. I wanted to come on to Mogers as a company, start with that to frame the discussion. So how has it been so far for Mogers Drewett?
Yeah, I think in the circumstances, it's been pretty good. And we're pleased how things have gone so far. So I think you know, Greg, we have three offices, Bath, Wells and Sherborne, and we have about 80 heads in total. So we've currently got about 25% of the team furloughed right across the board, but it's mostly non-client facing roles. Yeah. We have a skeleton staff in two of our offices for post and those types of things, which you can't get away from as a law firm. So that's still ticking over. But we've had some very busy teams during the period that we've been in lockdown. Ag, private clients, commercial property has remained buoyant. Those types of things. Employment has obviously been very busy. And to be honest, we feel pretty lucky because we'd adopted some flexible working before the lockdown, but on the whole, we were still pretty much office-based, barring the odd day here and there. And we went from being office-based to entirely home-based in the space of about a week. And we were amazed at how well our people reacted to that. So we feel very lucky about the levels of employee engagement that we were able to benefit from. We basically
and to say, we will come on to that point about employee engagement as a general principle, because all of us face that both during this furlough period and perhaps more subsequently. I just want to ask one other point. I mean, other than that it is virtual, how has the nature of your work changed during lockdown?
Well, thinking about myself, so we act for all sorts of different sized clients and locations and all that type of stuff. So I get to see clients reasonably regularly, but legal fees being what they are nowadays, most clients try to limit the opportunities you have to go to their offices and those types of things. So one obvious change for us at the moment is that we see our clients a lot more than we ever have. So, and it's from an employment point of view, and employment clients who tend to be HR people and business owners. It's a nice thing to be able to get to know your clients a little bit better. You get a bit more personal insight. So you're not just going to some office in London or Birmingham or Bristol or wherever. You're seeing them in their home environment and they're a bit disarmed. And so I think that has changed for sure. And that's been a positive.
There's been a level of, an element of leveling for all of us that we are, I'm looking at your sort of shed or whatever in the background with your bikes and so on. All of us see a different context in which we're operating. Thank you for that. I'd like to bring in Lucy as well. We'll be coming on to employment predominantly, but also HR. So Lucy, if we could bring you forward. And by the way, whilst I'm waiting, that wouldn't be a Mogers shirt in the background, would it, Sean? On your wall?
It is, Greg. As my son pointed out yesterday, he said, it's an extra small, Daddy, so nobody will believe it's yours, but it's actually his. So, but yeah.
Good morning, everybody.
Kids could be the most perceptive. Lucy, hello. How's lockdown been for you personally?
Personally, interesting.
I'm not accepting that as an answer. What does that mean? Come on.
I have an 8-year-old son, so homeschooling and working is quite challenging, but we're managing to get through it. So that's all good.
Good. We're all personally and professionally figuring out our ways of navigating these incredibly choppy waters. I want to come on to one key element to start us with, which is the furlough scheme. This incredibly bold, far-reaching scheme that Rishi Sunak put in place maybe 2 months back and amended a couple of weeks back. It will run out. So I just want to come to Sean particularly, but Lucy, please join at whichever stage. Can you run through some do's and don'ts for employers? Perhaps picking up any common misapprehensions or clarifications that you've been asked?
Yeah, I think it is a game changer, or it was a game changer, Greg, and it's certainly prevented. Now, I looked at the figures this morning. I think there's currently about 8 million jobs furloughed, 8-9 billion pounds of cost on the exchequer. So, those jobs, without that scheme, would have been redundancies, and very likely would have been redundancies by now. So the scheme has been brilliant for employers and has definitely saved the day. Some of the tips, there's been a lot written about the furlough scheme and the way it was introduced, although it's brilliant and although it's been a fantastic thing to have the lag between the scheme being introduced and making claims and the rules clarifying throughout that whole period did cause a number of difficulties. So the top tips from us really are, number one, and it sounds silly to start with, but there has been a little bit of reluctance in the market to use the scheme. Some companies that we've spoken to and some clients we've spoken to have said, well, we're quite well reserved, we're cash positive, so we don't feel like we should use the furlough scheme. The reality is it's open to all employers whose business is interrupted and who have to ask employees to cease working because of the coronavirus. So number one is use the scheme if you're eligible, because you don't know how long you're going to need your reserves in place for.
And to check, the scheme is still open now. You could start a fresh claim today.
You can. Yeah, right. Absolutely. So
okay.
You can furlough anybody after the relevant date. So it came in for employees who are on the payroll 28th of February and then subsequently changed to the 19th of March. On the payroll, it means something slightly different to the rest of us. So on the payroll means registered on your employer's real-time inland revenue submission. So some employees will still fall out of those dates, but most will be included. So yes, you could furlough people today just as easily as you could furlough people in March.
Okay, what other tips do you have for us?
get written agreements in place with your employees about their status, because there is a conflict, or there was a conflict, between the guidance that came out of the government initially, and there were employer guidance and employee guidance, and then beginning of May, we had a Treasury directive which sets out the actual framework. Treasury directive takes precedence over the guidance, which has come from the HMRC, and there are a number of points which conflict. And one of those points at the outset was the original guidance said, write to your employees notifying that they are designated as being furloughed. And then the Treasury guidance 6 weeks later said, if you have a written agreement in place with your employee that they are furloughed, you can make a claim under the scheme. So there was a whole flurry of activity around that.
But just to clarify, that anomaly or timing point has now been clarified. So that's not an issue.
It has been clarified. It has. So, but just in case, I think is worth, and there is going to be another opportunity in a few weeks to go through that process again with the changes that have been introduced. So our view remains, if you can get a written agreement in place with your employees to achieve a furlough, you should do that for the avoidance of any doubt from an audit point of view.
Can I move on to what is permitted and what is not?
Yeah.
I think in our business, we've had our clashers have asked us this. We've attempted to interpret it. We don't profess to have the exact 100% right interpretation. If people are furloughed, what's the most they might be able to do which gets close to work, but which isn't still work?
Okay, so until the end of July, when the scheme will change, an employee who is furloughed cannot provide any services or contribute to the generation of revenue for their employer. So basically, you can't do your job. You can attend to do things voluntarily. You can do training, but you have to be paid. Won't apply to many organizations, but you have to be paid for the minimum wage for that training session if the furlough amount is less than that. So if it was Media Clash, your employees, Greg, can't do those things for Media Clash, but they could work for another employer if your contracts permit them to, and if you consent to them to doing that during the furlough period.
I'm not suggesting this for our business, nor necessarily anyone on this call. But as a principle, what is to stop companies saying, you know what, a couple of our guys will work for you and a couple of your guys will work for us, and neither is in conflict with the furlough scheme? Isn't that open to abuse? That is, yeah. There is little stopping that other than the HMRC fraud line, which has been quite busy, I think. I think it has been receiving quite a high volume of calls. I haven't heard that one, but there's been a lot of exploratory conversations around the extent to which the furlough scheme can be used. But the revenue have been very, very clear about their ability to audit and their desire to audit. Everyone has been asked to maintain records for at least 5 years after the scheme comes to an end. Whether the government would ever have the resource to staff that audit process properly is a separate matter, but I think we should expect to be audited quite heavily. So let's go to an absolute practicality. Say someone, whichever business, has a phone call from a client. A, do they not even take the phone call? B, do they take it, be polite and say, look, I'm furloughed? Or C, is there any other scope beyond saying, hello, I'm furloughed, hope you're well? I think there's an absolute practicality to protect there's a clash between you're talking about a customer facing role where those employees, whether they be accountants, salespeople, lawyers, whatever they might be, their nature is to generate revenue and to service clients. So it's very hard to turn that off, but that's different to an employer's requirement to protect the integrity of their furlough claim. So from a practical point of view, what our clients are saying to their staff is, you shouldn't do anything. You shouldn't take the call. If you can avoid taking the call, put measures in place that deal with that. If that doesn't work, then you have to say to the customer or the client, I'm furloughed, please speak to a colleague. It's in the nature of many Bath businesses, yours, ours, many on this call, that there are sort of blurred lines between friendships, clients, relationships, people you've known for years, people you automatically refer to, and so on. I just want to bring in Lucy on this point. Whilst it may be for the absolute avoidance of doubt, as lawyers sometimes say, it's right simply not to take the call. Would you, in practical terms, advise anyone on this call not to take a call on their mobile they might get from someone who they know? And how would you differentiate between knowing as a sort of friend, sort of client, or whatever? How does it work in practice?
I think that's an interesting question. It very much depends, I guess, on what that person is hoping to receive from you. So to take the guidance by the letter, if that person is trying to seek information that could generate some revenue for your business, then clearly that's not going to be allowed to happen. So it's going to be very much down to what that person, I think, wants from you. Obviously, anyone who is furloughed, there needs to be, as Sean mentioned, some measures put into place before that actually happens. So you would expect things perhaps for telephone numbers to be transferred to other people, or for emails to be diverted. May need to avoid those sorts of situations, which could make it then difficult to differentiate between whether that person wants something that would breach the furlough agreement in any way. I think other things that could be put in place perhaps could be some regular communication back with the manager, just to check in, make sure that those conversations haven't happened, or if they have, whether they could be picked up by somebody else.
Yeah, as a general point, I'm afraid I can't respond to this, but I can refer you to someone who can. That sort of rhythm is how we've approached it. Many others will have approached it. Yeah. If I may, at this point, can I bring in one of our very great Bath Life Awards finalists, Calvin Simmons from Mandolin's Bar. Calvin, if we can bring you forward onto screen, because I know you've got an interesting question about alternative ways of trying to generate money and what is permissible. Calvin, if you want to unmute yourself, you can join.
There we go.
Lovely.
Can you hear me?
We can, yeah.
Great.
Good morning.
Yes, I mean, for us, obviously once we closed, our revenue stopped completely and all the staff were furloughed. The thing, we're trying to look at alternative ways to generate revenue. It's obviously something we've never done before, and there's no guarantee to its success. So what would be the best way to go about doing this, as all the staff are technically unable to work?
Can I just frame that slightly differently? Because I think many of us will have had this point as well. We have interesting ideas, but in order to see whether there's any validity, we need to share them and discuss them and actually bring people out of furlough. And I'm sure, Calvin, that's a sort of issue you're facing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah. So Sean or Lucy on that one.
Yeah. Hi, Calvin. At the moment, the answer is that the scheme doesn't accommodate that type of approach. And shortly after the scheme was introduced, a lot of frustration was expressed, particularly by smaller businesses, that they couldn't furlough an employee part-time, or reduce somebody's hours and furlough the rest, etc. Those types of combinations. That will come in from the 1st of August, though, or that we're expecting that to come in from the 1st of August. And the employer will have the opportunity to share the cost of the salary from that date. And that's not particularly brilliant from day one, but you will have the opportunity to utilize the employee part-time at that point. So you'll be able to use that combination of cost saving to achieve some of those revenue generation schemes.
Sean, could I ask a different question then? Originally, I think the minimum period that people had to be furloughed was 3 weeks. The other way around, now, could people be brought back for a day, a week, 2 weeks? What's the shortest you can bring people back and then re-furlough? Yeah,
there isn't a minimum, Greg. So as long as each period of furlough is at least 3 weeks, you can unfurlough or defurlough, whichever word you prefer. I see them bandied around, but you can bring somebody back from furlough at very, very short notice, subject to things that Lucy's going to talk about in a bit. but you can bring somebody back from furlough and refurlough them after a short period of work, as long as the next period of furlough is for at least 3 weeks.
Yeah,
Can I
sorry.
on Calvin.
Yeah, because that'd be really useful for us, because obviously we could do that in the short term to prep for the other side of the business, if you like, and then refurlough, so we're ready to go.
So you could, Calvin, imagine in July, for example, you have a mixed rotation of people coming back for a short period of time, which allows you to feed into a part-time working pattern from the 1st of August, which might fit together quite well, depending on what your plans are.
It's what's called in football continuous substitution, basically.
Yeah.
But can I absolutely press you on this point, Sean, because I'm not sure it is completely clear. Maybe it's just me. Could someone, whomever, whichever company, come back for 2 or 3 days, do a burst of work to investigate an area potentially, or whatever it might be, and then go back onto furlough? Could it be as little as that? Yes.
The fact you've asked me twice now makes me think Lucy, you don't think differently, do you?
No, I don't. As Sean said, there's no minimum. So you can bring somebody back for whatever time you want, but the important bit is when they are furloughed, it is for a minimum of 3 weeks.
Yeah.
When they're in that instance, in my example, when they are refurloughed, essentially.
Refurloughed, yeah.
Refurloughed,
yeah. Calvin, thank you for that point, and we wish you, and indeed all the businesses on this call, all the best in these difficult times. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good luck, Calvin.
Thank you.
Lucy, can we come back to this one? How much engagement can companies have, and should there be, with their teams during furlough?
So for individuals who are furloughed, clearly, as we said, you can't engage them in any work, but I think it's really important that communication lines stay open with them. And that might not be official work, ones you would do in work. It could be something quite informal. So just maintaining some sort of contact with people, making sure that they're okay, because this is a time when it's having a huge impact on all of us, both physically and mentally. So keeping those connections with your staff are really important.
And thank you. On that point, I'd like to bring in Emma Sambrook of Rice. She's the development manager of a research charity for older people's care. Emma, you've got a point about the nature of the information that you should be sharing about current work. And here we go. Hello.
Morning,
Good morning, Emma.
Hello. Emma.
My question was very specifically around how much information you need to give, or you can give people, about what's actually happening in the business whilst they're on furlough. I was thinking about women who are on maternity leave, they get to keeping in touch days. Do we do something similar to let people know what's actually happening, what the changes are, so they know when they come back?
Sean?
Lucy, do you want to do
that? I think you should be keeping in contact with your staff about things that are happening. You're absolutely right. So for employees who are on maternity, they do get keeping in touch days, which is the whole purpose of that. When you're away from the office, you need to know exactly what's been going on in order to be effective when you come back. One of the things that we'll touch on perhaps a bit later is about helping to retain staff in these sorts of periods, and part of that might be some sort of reorientation or reinduction with your staff. So I can't see an issue with keeping people up to date with what's happening.
Go on, Sean, you go.
The only slight prickly point there, Emma, is I agree completely with Lucy, and this is very, very unlikely to arise, but those comms should be voluntary on behalf of the employee. So I can't imagine many employees won't want to hear that information at the moment, but you might get the odd employee who says, I'm furloughed, why are you speaking to me? So don't require them to attend those sort of communication sessions, just invite them and say it's a voluntary thing. So.
And thank you, Emma, and likewise, again, to you, all the very best. Thank you for that point. I would like to move on to the JRS Job Recruitment Scheme 2.0, which will be announced pretty soon, may even be today, which is essentially tapering post August and September, prior to it finishing at the end of September. So that employers will be paying, as we gather, anything up to the existing level of 80%. So government may pay 60, we pay 20, etc. During that time, people will be able to work And the query is this: how on earth should it be monitored? Because in practice, if we said to anyone, any of our teams, you're able to do a day, a week or something, which is on our money, as it were, we've no way of knowing that they may not do more than that, because most people work longer than their hours in any case. So how might the compliance work in practice?
Yeah, that's going to be really difficult, Greg. So it's going to be, it's an easy answer, incredibly difficult to achieve. And there'll be a lot of devil in the detail from the revenue, hopefully today, on that. But I can't see how it works if it's too prescriptive, because the whole point of that change, and in fairness to the government, they have made change to the scheme with sort of responding to the rhythm of concerns that businesses have had to it. So if the aim of the change is to encourage a transition back to the workplace, there has to be some degree of flexibility around exactly what percentage of work you're performing versus the percentage of time you're furloughed, or else it won't work, and it'll be impossible to police and implement and monitor. So I would hope there's going to be a degree of flexibility, but if there's not, it's going to be incredibly difficult from a compliance point of view.
Happy days. I'd like to bring in Nick Gain of Sulis Guides, and as Nick is coming online, this is into a slightly more technical territory from a director's point of view about how and whether directors can be furloughed. So Nick, are you joining us? With the wonders of technology, he's there. Nick, hello.
There we go. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi,
Good morning.
Morning. Yeah, so my question is, if someone is a director of a company and obviously goes through the PAYE scheme, but the director is also running a business as a sole trader, and that's an example of us at Sulis Guides. We are directors of Sulis Guides. We go through the PAYE scheme. We have no work at all at the moment. Our diary is empty right the way through to the end of July now. August is already dropping off for guiding. All of us have self-employment where we pick up work ourselves through national databases. So we're furloughed as directors. As a sole trader, can we also take the benefit of the sole trade grant as well as being furloughed at this time?
How's that one for you, Sean?
Yeah, okay. So Nick, when you say you're a sole trader, how do you, the revenue you generate from what you just described as sole trading, how do you deal with that from a tax point of view?
That is a separate entry on the self-assessment form as a sole trader.
So you treat that as a separate, entirely separate thing?
Yes, it's totally separate. So there's the PAYE declared on the self-assessment, and then there is the sole trader element declared as a totally separate business.
Okay, and none of that sole trading income goes through the limited company and produces dividends?
None at all. None at all. No, it is totally separate and totally distinct.
Okay, I think you should be able to do both.
Could I just suggest, Sean, you're usually very specific. You've got an element of doubt in your voice. I suggest, if, with respect to you and Nick, if you take this up separately, because it sounds like quite a technical and specific point. If that's okay, I would like to move on, if that's all right.
Okay,
That's great.
Thanks, Nick.
Thank you.
And we have had quite a few questions, and I'd ask both our panelists, indeed myself, to keep it a bit succinct from here if we can. One from Adrian Sullivan. We have one member of staff we've continued to employ. We have a number of staff that appear at work voluntarily and not being asked to do any work. What should we do?
Well, I don't know what business Adrian is from, but that makes me wince a little bit from a compliance point of view, because I would expect over the next 5 years, lots of employers to say they came in voluntarily. We didn't ask them to come in. So I think there needs to be some element of proactive management of that, rather than, and I'm not suggesting this is going on in Adrian's business, but I don't think it would be good enough from an audit point of view to have turned a blind eye. So I think the revenue will expect to see proactive implementation of the furlough scheme rules in order for those claims to be successful. So yeah, if that question is in the context of the furlough scheme, then I think a more proactive approach is required.
My take would be that I suspect the HMRC would be reasonably forgiving when it comes to the good-heartedness of employees, as long as the employers are offering the right advice.
Absolutely, yeah.
But you'll take your own view on that. Thank you. This is from our good old friend Anonymous. Can an employer legally serve you notice on your employment contract, say for 3 months, and place you on the furlough scheme whilst you serve your notice period at home?
Yes, short answer is yes. Slightly longer answer is, slightly longer and slightly more miserable answer is, lots of organisations are currently preparing and thinking about that, because it allows them to reduce the cost of any redundancy dismissals that need to be implemented between now and the end of October. So you could work your notice on furlough, and your employer, depending on what type of employee you are, you would either be entitled to your furlough pay for that period or your full rate of pay. But the employer, in each case, regardless of what type of employee you are, will be able to claim back up to 80% to a cap of £2.5 for your notice pay. So it reduces the cost for the employer considerably. So,
talking of cost reductions, it may be the same, Anonymous, I don't know. If people were brought back from furlough temporarily, can their salary change? And I'm assuming, can they change temporarily or indeed permanently?
I think in theory, probably yes, but it's really complicated, because you're meant the furlough scheme. If you have somebody employed now who's on short-time working and reduced pay, and you furlough them, you have to bring them back to full pay before you furlough them. So to bring somebody back from furlough, put them on short-time working, terminate that, and re-furlough them it's a bit ridiculous. So, but I think technically, if you have the paperwork in place to demonstrate that those decisions have been made,
technically you can.
Technically, but I think it sounds it's potentially a bit abusive.
It's a bit scuzzy, to use a deeply non-technical term. Graham Pappenfuss from Kingswood at school, he says, my understanding is you can only be furloughed a maximum of 3 times. Is this correct?
I've not heard that, Graham, so that's news to me. I think might be getting confused with the 3 weeks rather than 3 times, but I don't believe that's the case.
No.
Okay. Again, Anonymous, can you use the furlough period to plan and set up a new business? Will it put in jeopardy your employer's furlough scheme claim against your cost?
So if that question means, can an employee who is furloughed spend time planning a new business that has got nothing to do with their existing employment? Yes, they're separate. And as we said at the beginning, you can go and do work for another employer if your current employer allows. Obviously, beware of setting up a business that is going to compete with your existing employer. That would
you've been breach of contract.
You've been breach of contract. You might get the sack, and you might get sued anyway afterwards if you're doing something that you shouldn't be. But yes, you can. The short answer is yes, you can do that.
So to turn that advice the other way around, if anyone is thinking of setting up a business, it is very smart for them to let their employer know that they're thinking that way, because otherwise they could be in breach in some way. Most employment contracts will be reasonably restrictive.
Yes. Yeah.
Can employees be newly furloughed from August the 1st, or do they already need to be on furlough by then? Do we know yet?
I think it's going to be a combination of the two, Greg. So employees who are already furloughed can continue to be furloughed, but if the employer wants to change the nature of that agreement to bring them back part-time, then the furlough agreement will the existing agreement will need to be amended or have a side letter or something to deal with it, or you can just furlough somebody fresh from the 1st of August.
I think it's more the latter point, just to understand. Imagine someone has not been furloughed at all, and a company at the point of August 1st thinks, we just need this. They could start, as far as we know at this point, a new furlough scheme for a new person at that point.
As far as I'm aware, and that would be consistent with the whole purpose of the scheme. So because employers who haven't furloughed yet are more likely to be under more considerable financial stress than those that have. So it would seem inconsistent with the scheme rationale that it wouldn't be able to do that. So
let's move on to holidays and furlough. This is all of this is quite complicated. I'd like as simple and as clear and as direct a sort of almost an instruction, but guidance on what should happen to holiday which has been at least notionally accrued during the furlough period. What can employers do and what do employees need to agree? How does it work?
Okay, so firstly, that there's no notional accrual. It's an actual accrual. So your accrual continues during your furlough in the same way as it would if you were at work. The questions on all employers' minds are: how much burden is that accrual creating in my business in the latter part of this year? And if I do something about it now, how much do I have to pay? And can I afford to do that now? There was some conflict when the rules first came out because holidays, taking holiday from work doesn't mean going to Spain or going to, wherever you might go. It means having time off for rest and relaxation away from work. So there was some discussion, at least amongst lawyers, whether you could do that if you were locked down in your house, but it's now been clarified, and you can. So employees who are furloughed can take their holiday as normal, and employers who have employees who are furloughed can require their employees to take holidays as normal if they wish, and if they comply with certain notice requirements under the working time regulations. So the easy answer is yes, holidays continue to work as they normally have. You have to pay the normal rate of pay, not the furloughed rate of pay, broadly speaking, unless you're a 0 hours employee. But broadly speaking, it's 100% of normal rate of pay, but the employer can claim back the 80%. So
just to play that back, it seems to me that at least especially there's complete mutuality here. If employees are willing to do it, they can claim holiday at an effective higher rate of pay than it would have been otherwise. And from an employer's point of view, it means that they've got their squad in place come the autumn or whatever, not needing to take all those holidays to fight the good fight as we will all face at that time. So to play it back to you very clearly, is the advice to take holidays during furlough from both sides' point of view?
Yeah, I think, although the employee side of that, a lot of the narrative that's coming back to our employer clients is our employees don't want to take their holiday because they don't want to waste it on doing nothing, which is why that's a different question. So speaking from an employer point of view, I think the answer is yes, you should require your employees to take their holidays because that reduces the burden and allows you to perform better as we all emerge from this. That you will earn more as an employee, so there is some upside there, but you won't be able to do very much with it. That's the only downside, but that's not a legal point. But
yeah, so it's a trade. It's an extra bit of money, but there's not much you can do with it. That's the holiday point. But there's another question we've had from again one of our anonymouses. If that's a thing. It's about the restorative break. That can an employee legitimately argue that was simply not the option for holidays? What we mean by holidays during furlough. You can't have this restorative break because you can't leave your home. And then related, how can employers demonstrate that they've given due consideration to this point?
Yeah, that's a terribly European question because the whole rest and relaxation rationale has come from EU case law, not UK case law. But yeah, during the lockdown when people couldn't go out and couldn't do anything, there was that is why there was a clash of views. Some lawyers thought, no, there's no problem. Other lawyers thought you can't possibly have rest and relaxation if you're locked down in your house unless you chose to. So this is in relation to the employers requiring rather than allowing. But now that the lockdown has been relaxed a bit, people are doing, and you've seen on the news the last few days how crazy certain beaches have been and what have you. So I think it's self-evident. I don't think the arguments of I can't do anything, I can't get the rest and relaxation will work anymore, because you can exercise as much as you want. You can go and meet a friend in the park. So I think that argument is probably done, unless you're ill or you're still shielding and you can't be released from lockdown. There might be some odd exceptions to it.
So it sounds to me like, as in virtually all of this area, the key is open communication between companies
100%.
and teams.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to move on to this and to Lucy's area particularly, of employee retention activities. Some smart ideas for employers now during lockdown and really also post-lockdown. We'll come to the return to work bit in a moment, but those, Lucy, please.
So obviously during furlough, as we mentioned before, keeping some sort of communication going with your employees is quite important. You need to make sure that they are still looked after by you as an employer. And I think as we're moving to the stage where people are perhaps coming out of furlough for whatever reason, plans need to be put in place. And I mentioned earlier about some sort of reorientation or reinduction back into the workplace, because things have likely to have changed and people need to know what things have changed and how that might affect them. One really important thing as well, and it covers everything that we've been talking about in terms of communication, is really engaging with your employees, seeking their views, finding out what their worries and what their concerns are at the moment. I think that's probably, for me, the number one thing that needs to be done. Is we have and I keep saying we have a duty of care to employees, so we need to make sure that we are listening with seriousness to any concerns or worries they might have, and trying where we can to act on those. We want to create some sort of inclusive culture within our workplaces, so by carrying out those sort of activities, we make sure that people are well informed and ready to come back when they're able. And hopefully that then aids retaining those people going forward.
Okay, we'll come back to that part of it in a little bit, but just talk to me about the employer duty of care. Is it any different when your teams are at home than it is your duty of care when they're in the office or workplace?
So wherever your employees may be working, you have a duty of care to them. So whether that's physical or mental, and we need to make sure that we are addressing any issues they may have. So working from home, whether that be your office setup or something like that, or whether there are any worrying times, people might be stressed or pressured about work and things, just keeping in contact with people, making sure that we are behaving correctly as the employer in helping them manage those situations.
Is it anything more, and I'm not diminishing it by saying that, anything more than being thoughtful and decent? Are there other things we should be doing?
There's practical things I think we should be doing. So like I said about office setup, making sure that that's correct, because that's a health and safety issue potentially. Other things that we might want to do, like we said about keeping in touch with people about stuff. We might be promoting mental health type things a bit more. As you know, Mental Health Awareness Week this week. We might be bringing people awareness around how to look after their mental health at this time, whether that's around relaxation or mindfulness or something like that. Obviously, these are unprecedented times for everybody at the moment, so just trying where we can to support and help staff as much as possible.
Let's move on to the return to work, which is becoming more and more in prospect, even if it's still some months away. Some businesses are back in place already, some never went away. But talk about the employer's duty of care and into the sort of best practice advice about the process for people to come back in, consultations, surveys, suggestions, that sort of thing.
Yeah, of course. I mean, health and safety is going to be paramount in any return to any workplace. And there are probably 3 questions that an employer needs to ask themselves when it comes to deciding whether you want to return to the workplace. The first one, is it essential? So if you can carry on working from home, do you actually need to be back in the workplace? Is it sufficiently safe for you to do that? Have you risk assessed your workplaces and made sure that the right control measures have been put in place to mitigate as best you can where any risk may be? And thirdly, is it mutually agreed? So again, making sure that you are consulting and engaging with your employees to make to listen to any concerns or worries they may have about returning to the workplace. There's a range of factors that need to be taken into account when you're thinking about coming back to workplaces, and those factors, or the level of severity of those factors, will be different depending on where you are.
Take a sort of another normal or normalish office, or indeed any workplace. What do employers actually have to do? Screens, masks?
Well, first of all, you need to assess the risk. So you need to identify what is going to be the likely risk of letting your staff come into the office. Those risks may be different for different offices. So depending on the space you have, can you ensure social distancing? Can you ensure that people can travel to work safely? And there may be issues with certain areas of the country, like London, for example, when a lot of people rely on public transport. At the moment, I have no idea how people will be able to use those transport, because there's still plans being put into place and trying to limit numbers. Other things to be mindful of about shared facilities or resources that you have in the office. Are you going to allow people still to use communal kitchens? Or are you going to put those out of bounds and people have to bring their own food and drink in? You've also got to think about your vulnerable or extremely vulnerable workers as well. And you need to identify those, because at the moment the guidance says that those people should remain at home. So there's so many things. Sorry.
So presumably also things like meeting rooms, even toilets, there needs to be an approach.
Absolutely. And the way you can control or mitigate risks around those may be different for different people, and there's a whole range of things that you could do. Yes, you could provide gloves, but I think with that you need to also provide information and guidance on how to use those gloves. They're one use only type of resource. Yes, you could allow people to use your kitchens, but you may have to use disposable items. You might want to consider, going back to travel, encouraging people to cycle or walk to work. And there's things you can do to encourage those things, cycle to work schemes, those sorts of things.
What would you think is fair in terms of a notice period for teams to return? We had a survey at Media Clash, and the option with the greatest number supporting it was 2 weeks. Others said less, others said longer. What would you advise?
I think my advice will be, one, to determine how long it's going to take for you to make sure that workplace is safe. It needs to be the first thing. And I have a few clients who it goes beyond making sure that desks are marked out and things like that. It's also about returning some equipment that maybe has been taken from the offices and making those sorts of arrangements. So my advice around that has been actually 2 weeks to allow you time to do that, but also to inform, consult with employees. If there are people who are extremely anxious about returning to the workplace, it gives you ample opportunity to discuss those with them and then come up with the best resolution.
Okay, and on that point, it's something raised by our good friend Anonymous, but I was going to raise anyway, which is, do employees have the right to say no? They hear all the reassurance, but they say, look, it's too much of a risk. I've got elderly parents, I've got young kids, got whatever it is. I don't want to travel on public transport, etc., etc., etc. I don't want to come back to work just now. I'll work from home. Can they insist?
I'll deal with that, Greg. I think the short answer is it depends on the circumstances, but if you so employers have to exercise a good degree of caution in relation to those types of employees, because there's a lot of statutory protection built into employment law for employees who might be dismissed or exposed to some sort of detriment as a result of raising health and safety concerns about their working environment. So it's too early, I think, to say with any clear judgment what the position is going to be in relation to those issues, because each workplace is going to be the same. But if an employer gets to the position over the next few months that the government guidance is nice and clear, they've been through a very good risk assessment, and their office is as COVID secure as they can make it in all of the circumstances. And at the end of that process, an employee says, I'm just not coming back to work because I don't trust you, then that's going to be unreasonable on behalf of the employee. The employer will have spoken to that employee a lot during that process, but at that point, it is more likely that that employee will then be subjected to some sort of misconduct type process.
So to put it the other way around, both sides need to work hard to make sure they don't get to that mess.
Absolutely, yeah. It's really, really important. Yeah.
If they do, employees could be in breach if they were to insist when the employer can demonstrate it has been reasonable. Can I ask a similar-ish point? Would you recommend people join their relevant union to safeguard their future in these turbulent times?
Yeah, unions can be really helpful in some situations, and from an employment point of view, and really unhelpful in others. So yeah, if you have the ability to join a union and you're concerned about your individual rights, that can be a useful way of obtaining advice and guidance and understanding what you can do about certain things. Because I think one of the consequences of what we're going through, Greg, is going to be the ability for employees to seek legal redress in a sensible time frame. So if somebody falls out with their employer now and wants to bring a claim in the employment tribunal, then that's probably next autumn before they have their claim heard, which it's unacceptable to wait that length of time. So taking opportunities and exploring opportunities to solve problems now, which may include using a union and help the assistance from a union, is going to be much, much better and have much more meaning than lobbing a claim into Bristol Employment Tribunal. So.
Right. This conversation is going through the rings of Hades down deeper and worse and worse. We're going to come to the truly grimmer stuff to end on. How's that for timing? Which is about redundancies and change of terms. Again, our very good friend Anonymous has asked, if we wished to change employment terms, hours, salaries, temporarily, what do we do if an employee doesn't accept our proposed changes, even though the same changes would apply to all members of staff, whether furloughed or unfurloughed? And if we then say that redundancy is the only subsequent option, how do we avoid a potential constructive dismissal action being brought against us?
Yeah, so from an employment law point of view and an employer point of view, it's relatively straightforward to minimise the risks associated with doing those things at the moment because of the circumstances we're in. So first question is, it depends how many employees are affected. If it's less than 20 or more than 20, there are different processes. But let's say it's less than 20. It's a question of consulting, communicating with the staff who are affected, explaining why it's happening, and seeking their consent to the change. If they don't consent, after you've been through that process of consultation, then you would unilaterally impose the change by serving notice of their existing employment and offering to re-engage them on the new terms of employment, which would have the reduced hours or whatever it might be. And if they choose not to accept that new contract, technically they're dismissed in the eyes of an employment tribunal, but the employer would have a pretty healthy defence to that. There's a statutory defence to that type of dismissal built into the statute. So that's for changing terms and conditions. If it's a redundancy situation, it's kind of the same consultation process. There's a bit more to do around pooling and selection, but ultimately, if you go through that process and you have a genuine redundancy situation to rely upon, it's very unlikely that you're going to have a constructive dismissal.
To ask again the other way around, I mean, there is an awful lot of case law, of course, around employment redundancies, change of terms and so on. Has furlough per se changed any of the approach to employment when it comes to redundancy and change of terms? Or is it's applicable, but it's just the process is perhaps a bit different because of communication?
No, it hasn't. There was a suggestion, because if you have more than 20 employees, you have to go through it at risk of redundancy or whose terms you're trying to change. You have to go through a certain statutory process which requires minimum periods of consultation. There was a suggestion a little while ago that that was going to change and be disapplied during the crisis, but that never happened. There's a get out of jail bit in those regulations that says if special circumstances exist, you don't have to comply with those minimum periods. Again, when it first started, and before the furlough scheme, lots of employers were thinking, I might have to consult. How do I can't do it for 30 days because I'm shutting my business. That would fit into that special circumstance. But now that we know a bit more about it and we have more, a longer view of it, I don't think it would. And in any event, that's not a new thing. So that's an existing thing.
Just to close off that area, as an observation, I think in my experience, most companies, and I have to say most definitely in Bath, most companies, most employers are very thoughtful about their teams. They are incredibly stressed at the moment, trying to figure out the way to run their business. They don't wish to make redundancies. No one wants to make redundancies per se. We're all trying to find new ways of running, new ways of operating. The furlough scheme helps and so on. It still may be that redundancies will happen, but they are very, very much a last resort, I suspect. And I think that's... No,
I think that's right. And yes, employers are thoughtful and lots of our clients want to do the right thing, but also, again, going back to the Mogers Drewett experience, our employees are also really, really thoughtful at the moment. And they all pretty much, everybody is saying, what can I do to help? And, how can I help the business? How can I help the firm's clients? So lots of employees at the moment are being really flexible. And those employees who might, in other businesses, who might not be being flexible, you really should be, because the way to solve the problems arising from this crisis is by both sides of that equation being thoughtful and flexible to get through it.
Yeah, when the tide goes out, you see the shore in all its glories, but also all its horrors. And there are some bad practices out there. Yeah. I didn't wish to sort of end this conversation on the lower point of redundancy. It is very much a last resort. And to your point about employees being very thoughtful, it's a slightly derided term, but we really are all in this together. We're all trying to figure it out, which is what this session's been about. I want to finish on a tangential point, which is not directly about employment, in fact, not about employment at all. It's for those listening, it's about general advice on schools. Currently, and it may well change later today, currently the plan is for schools to go back for certain years come June 1st, straight after half term. But can parents refuse to allow their kids to go back to school, whenever that might be, because they're fearful, for all the reasons we've talked about?
Yeah, I think it's not just being dull about it for a second, Greg. It's not my area, so this is not specifically legal advice, but there's obviously a whole host of regulation around not sending your kids to school and kids refusing to go to school and homeschooling and all those things that exist outside of this crisis. The short answer is, based on what the government are currently saying, it appears that you can refuse to send your child back to school, and you won't. They're saying they will not subject the parents in those circumstances to any penalty. So they won't fine parents for not sending their kids to school. I looked this morning and it says during this time. So that's obviously that we all need to keep our eyes on that and for how that develops. But at the moment, and whether this will still be the case come the 1st of June, I suspect it will be. I think most parents on this call will have had the questionnaires from their schools over the last week asking whether they want to send their kids back to school or not. So I suspect come the 1st of June, that will be the government's position, but I suspect it will change come the autumn when things have settled down more and there is less apparent risk associated with going back to school, hopefully.
And you never know, for all the unfair, horrible vitriol directed at teachers, it looks as though a consensus is emerging that it's not so much June 1st, it's when we're ready. And that is whenever that is. And it's to Lucy's point about, it's the same principle for offices. It's not a hard date as such, or 2 weeks out from notification, it's when we are ready. And that came through very clearly. I would like to wrap up now. We're dead on 11 o'clock. Our sincere thanks to Mogers Drewett today, to Sean, a virtual clap, and to Lucy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you to all of you for your time and questions today, for your attendance and so on. Please look out for the next Bath Life Business Club. That's next Wednesday. We run a series of short interviews, Tales from the Lockdown, featuring, in this case, the financial sector with Novia and Bill Vasiliev. charity, the Citizens Advice Bureau and Les Redwood, and hairdressing with the eponymous Zara Perry. Please also look out for that Bath Life virtual wine tasting, which we mentioned, raising money for the Bath Bull, run with Stony Street, and it'll be on the evening of June the 3rd. Our next Bath Life Business Surgeries include other sessions on wills, LPAs, and personal financial planning, and also dispute resolution, both of those again with Mogers Drewett. Others will include commercial property, digital strategies, office design, and recruitment and employee motivation. We all need those forms of help and advice. If your company, anyone listening to this, has professional advice in any area of business that can help others, please do get in touch. We all need help navigating here. Yes, this is a tough time, but this too shall pass. This has been a Media Clash production, and this has been the second Bath Life Business Surgery. Thank you very much. #BathTogether. Thank you.